Here we are. We are in chapter 7. So, welcome to our next block of criminal theories. Now, just to recap, last week we talked about, in our first block of criminal theories, we focused on rational choice theory. We then shifted gears to trait theory, and then we concluded with social structure theory. This week, we're going to start off with chapter 7, examining social process theory. So, let's get right into it, shall we? So, when we think about social process theory, what is socialization? Socialization is this process of acquiring social norms, values, behavior, and skills through interaction with significant others such as parents, peers, and teachers. Now, listen, I gotta say this. In my in person classes, we have a dialogue. The way I lecture, and I'm lecturing to you all, the masses, and lecturing to people out in cyberspace, it's very different and difficult because I don't have any interaction back. So I've had to make some adjustments. I'll, just kind of move things along. Essentially, what I'm doing is I'm taking a lecture that would be about nearly two to 2.5 hours, and I'm trying to cut it down to 40 to 45 minutes because we don't have the interaction. Socialization is important because what socialization does, class, is that it allows you to interact with other people. I know there's some people that don't like talking to other people, but with socialization, we are interacting and engaging with others. And it's nothing wrong with that. In fact, it's a great, great thing. Well, if we're going to apply this to theory, then we have to say, okay, well, what is social process theory? This is the view that criminality is a function of people's interactions with various organizations, institutions, and processes in society. So we know socialization is where you are acquiring skills, behavioral skills, values, norms, etc., social skills through talking to and interacting with others. In this instance, we see social process theory as criminality is a function based on interactions, and those interactions can include organizations, institutions, and processes. Now, before I go on, social structure theory deals with neighborhoods, right? So last chapter, we talked about social structure theory, and we looked at it from the perspective of crime being perpetuated by neighborhood. The social disorganization theory have when institutions or the breakdown of the neighborhood is visible, it creates additional disorder. You eventually become a product of your environment, and even broken windows theory, correct? We're focusing on with social structure theory, a breakdown in the neighborhood. And of course, you had strain in there as well as cultural deviance. But with process, on the other hand, criminality is primarily a function based on interactions with organizations, institutions, and processes. So, social process theory is broken into 3 key theories. The first theory is that it is focused on social learning theory. People learn the techniques and attitudes of crime from close relationships with criminal peers. Crime is a learned behavior. That's the easiest way to remember social learning theory. Crime is a learned behavior. You're going to learn based on close relationships with peers, close relationships with criminal peers, and crime is a learned behavior. Then we have social control theory. Everyone has the potential to become a criminal, but most people are controlled by their bonds to society. Crime occurs when the forces that bind people to society are weakened or broken. Think about it. Me, you, your friends, your loved ones, anybody can be a criminal, right? Period. And I do love social control theory. This is another one of my favorite theories. But because we have certain bonds, that's why we do not engage in criminality, okay? So I love this theory because when we look at crime and we look at criminals and criminal offending, when those bonds are weak and when those bonds are broken, that's where they're going to engage in crime. And those bonds being in society. The last one, class, is the social reaction labeling theory. People become criminals when significant members of society label them as such, and they accept those labels as a personal identity. So when you are labeled as such, as we'll go through towards the end of the lecture, then that's where people say, okay, I am a criminal, I'm labeled as such, I'm going to live up to that moniker. So these are the 3 theories we're going to go through in this lecture. So in terms of institutions of socialization, interaction with key social institutions help control human behavior. Think about how the family is a major determinant of behavior. Now, remember in the lecture I did on trait theory, and if you didn't watch that lecture, bad student, you need to be watching the lectures. If you're just tuned in because you follow me on my page, you're subscribed, you just happen to come here, and then go back and check out some of these earlier lectures, because I'm taking you on a journey as if you're a student in this class from the beginning of the semester to the end of the semester, but we're doing this in 5 weeks. Having said that, remember when I showed the two individuals, I did cut off their face to conceal their identities. However, I talked about how I dealt with the son, who was JN the third, and then the person on the right was JN Jr., and then of course JN Sr. had a significant rap sheet. And we were talking about, is crime genetic? Is it inherently a genetic? Do people inherit genetic traits of criminality from their family members or loved ones? Well, if we're talking about socialization here, we have to consider family relations, because the relationship that a person has with their family can be a major determinant of behavior. Now, not always, right? And we're going to get to that in a moment. But what we do want to look at is we want to look at the fact that parenting factors, such as the ability to communicate and to provide proper discipline, plays a critical and crucial role in determining whether people misbehave as children or even as adults. Did you get in trouble if you did something wrong? Did you get a spanking, or were you disciplined, or were you chastised by your parents? Or did they just say, oh, he's such a cute little boy, she's a cute little girl, she can do no wrong, right? So how you were treated by your family matter. Now, there's a difference between abuse, such as you see right here, parental abuse and emotional abuse. There's a difference between that and discipline, right? Abuse is done to make a child feel a sense of guilt and shame, and it's a form of quote unquote punishment to not prove a point, but it's done out of anger. Whereas discipline is a form of punishment to correct a bad behavior. So just keep that in mind when looking at the definition between the two. Now, educational experience matters. We're going to talk about educational experience as a matter of fact, we're going to do it in our next chapter when we get to social conflict, critical criminology, and restorative justice. That's our next chapter. So we will be talking about that there. But educational experience matters. Race and educational problems matter. Think about how minorities are certainly at a higher risk of dropping out. They're at a greater risk of not succeeding in school. Bullying is a real issue, especially when you have kids who are foreigners or they're from other countries. Maybe they don't speak English well. It's very easy to pick on them and see them as vulnerable targets. And the peer relations matter, because I want you to think about this. Do negative peers influence delinquent or criminal behavior? That answer is absolutely yes. I would tell people all the time in my juvenile justice class, if you're hanging with bad kids, you're going to likely engage in bad behavior. It's contagious. It's infectious, right? Being around bad or troubled or delinquent children will likely influence a person to engage in troubled or delinquent behavior. So peer relations matter. And again, as we look at social process theory, if criminality is the byproduct of social interactions, if it's the byproduct of how someone responds to certain peer groups, parents, etc., if you have a poor relationship with your parent, if you're doing poorly in school, and you have a whole lot of friends that are in trouble with the law or engaged in criminal or delinquent behavior, chances are you're going to do the same as well. So Haben and Weirman, they did a study. They were two criminologists that did a study. And what they found is that adolescents are often exposed to delinquent peers in situations of unstructured socializing. Look, I have a son. He plays football. Matter of fact, on pretty much every day, with exception for Friday, I drop him off at about 6:15 in the morning at his high school to start training, working out in the gym, lifting weights, and getting ready for the season. And then I take him and a good friend of his home, and while practice ends at 11, they don't get out until 11:45. And I learned that the hard way after the first day. Having said that, it blows my mind when I'm walking and I just goes with the territory. It's just how the kids are today. But I'm not going to tolerate disrespect either. But I hear them talking and cursing and carrying on. And, I grew up in a day and age where, listen, if an adult is walking by you, you watch your mouth. I don't care if you're 16, 17, 18. You could be 6'3" or you could be 5'1". You didn't, it was just different. But I understand that times changed. And I hate to sound like the old guy, but I'm just saying there was a way when I was coming up, even when I played football 20 years ago, 20 something years ago, it was just different. There was a level of respect even around adults you didn't know, So it's different. And why I bring this up is because when there are unstructured socializing, hanging out at the front of the school, like on the football field, the coaches, if they heard those players cursing, they're probably going to make everybody run until you vomit and pass out. However, at the front of the school where everyone's getting picked up or they're walking to their cars or they're waiting for their parents, people start acting a fool, And so that's where we're talking about unstructured socializing, the mall, schools, hanging out at the front of the school, other hangout spots. And of course, being exposed to delinquent peers increases the temptation that will allow other kids to engage in delinquency. So Hobbin and Wehrman were definitely onto something. Again, this is not rocket science, but it's very poignant and it's very much noteworthy. So if we know that being around bad people, delinquent people, criminal people, if we know that, hanging around those types of individuals will likely get a person in trouble, then we want to say, okay, well, what can we do to put them around people that won't get them in trouble? And that's where religion and belief comes into play, because the belief and the idea is that if people go to church, if they are hanging around kids who are religious, then generally speaking, participating and going to church, you would often think that those individuals would be better able to resist not only illegal drug use, but they would be able to better resist hanging out with the wrong crowd and going to some of the wrong places, right? That's why participation in attendance matters. My same son last night with his football friend and a good friend of his went to a church organized pool party, and one of the friends that plays football was like, it was boring. He didn't want to be there. But this was his first time, so he may not have felt comfortable. But my son and my other friend, his other friend, that other friend has been coming to church pretty, for a while. He was coming regularly. He's fallen off a little bit. But they had a blast, right? So understand that a participation in attendance matters. Just being there, me getting those boys there, hopefully they'll have the wherewithal to say, you know what, next time I think I'll go. I maybe didn't think this was fun, but I'll give it another shot, right? Now, sometimes being around kids who are religious can have unintended consequences. Have you ever heard of the pastor's kids? Right? Think about it. Maybe you are watching this and you were a pastor's child. Sometimes the belief is that people who are pastors' kids, they go all out in terms of their behavior or their negative or even risky behavior. So what I wanted to show you before we continue moving on is just what is the social process approach, right? The social process approach focuses on the three theories: social learning theory, social control theory, and social reaction labeling theory. And we want to go ahead and get right into these theories. So let's talk about our first one, social learning theory. We have a bunch of different theories that fall under the social learning theory umbrella. One is differential association theory, the view that people commit crime when their social learning leads them to perceive more definitions favoring crime than favoring conventional behavior. In other words, if I feel that it's just better to engage in crime just because my quality of life will be better, even though I know I shouldn't be breaking the law, well, now I fall under social differential association theory. And again, it's a social learning because I'm talking to people that are like, it's okay to be stealing from stores. It's all right because those stores and those CEOs, they make millions of dollars, billions of dollars, and they treat people horribly. You're not a bad person, right? You're not a bad person taking from them because they take from people all the time, right? When looking at those principles of differential association theory, criminal behavior is learned. It's learned as a byproduct of interacting with others. Learning behavior occurs within intimate personal groups. Intimate personal groups matter when you think about your close-knit friends. Who are you close to? Are you close to people who have your best interests? Are you close to people who can be honest and truthful to you? Or are you close to people that might tell you a lie and might treat you a certain kind of way? Learning criminal behavior involves assimilating the techniques of committing crime, and it includes the motives, drives, rationalizations, and attitudes as well. Other principles: the specific direction of motives and drives is learned from perceptions of various aspects of the legal code as favorable and unfavorable. Think about the legal code, right? Think about how, do you appreciate the law? Do you respect the law? Do you acknowledge the law? Or do you look at the law and say, this law isn't for me, right? I don't agree with the law. And if I had my way, I would change the law, or I have a very unfavorable view of the law. Same thing when speaking of the law. A person becomes a criminal when he or she perceives more favorable than unfavorable consequences to violating the law. If we think that, hey, if I steal from this corporation, which I don't talk about it in this class, I talk about it in victimology, but a lot of times when you're stealing from places like Burlington, Kohl's, Ross, you get away. If you get away with $200, $300, $400 worth of merchandise, hey, it is what it is. They write it off as a loss and they pawn off the cost to the next person, right? So generally speaking, for some people, when talking with their peers, they may see that there is a perception of more favorable consequences to violating the law, in that the favorable consequences, I'm not going to get caught, or these loss prevention officers aren't going to fight me because they don't want to have us, or they don't want to put themselves in any harm's way. And most organizations or companies and corporations say, do not put yourself in harm's way. And then, of course, the process of learning criminal behavior by association with criminal and anti-criminal patterns involves all the mechanisms that are involved in any other learning process. How do you learn? Do you learn visually? If you're watching these videos, are you taking notes, or are you just sitting back saying, hey, I'm just going to let Professor Tails talk, and then once it's over, we're good? Like, how do you learn? If you were in an in-person class, would you be taking notes, or would you be just listening, or would you not even listen and be tuned out and zoned out? So, of course, when it comes to criminal behavior, it's going to involve all the mechanisms that are involved in any other learning process, whether that's learning how to paint, learning how to drive, learning how to shoot pool, whatever. It's going to be the same. It's going to be a learning process which takes time. You don't just learn it overnight. Another one was called neutralization theory. Gresham Sykes and David Matza developed this theory. They argue that they argue in this theory that they view the process of becoming a criminal as a learning experience. Law violators must learn and master techniques that enable them to neutralize conventional values and attitudes, which enables them to drift back and forth between illegitimate and conventional behavior. So pretty much they learn techniques, they master techniques that allow them to be looking at you in your face like they're the sweetest angel walking this planet, but deep inside, they will rob you the second you're not looking. Cold, calculated, but they can neutralize conventional values, and they know how to drift back and forth between good behavior and bad behavior. It's a very interesting concept, but it's broken into some other concepts as well. For example, when observing the neutralization model, sometimes they do voice guilt over their illegal acts. Sometimes they, respect law-abiding people. The point is that they're not just so cold and heartless, so they can acknowledge that they're doing something wrong, and they can even say, hey, I respect and admire law-abiding citizens, even though I'm not one, but I can still respect you, right? There's a measure of respect. So within neutralization theory, there are some techniques that are practiced. The first is the denial of responsibility. Young offenders sometimes claim that their unlawful acts are not their fault. In fact, they sometimes feel that there's forces beyond their control or accidents. I had a probationer a long time ago who literally said that it was a demon that was convincing her and telling her to do the stuff she was doing. And she said it stone face. I can see this person's face right now. I can't think of her name, but she was like, no, it was a demon who told me to go do this. I didn't like somebody, and so a demon told me. It's very concerning, but oftentimes they feel like there are forces beyond their control that tell them to do things, right? You also have denial of the injury. By denying the injury their acts cause, they neutralize illegal behavior. Sometimes stealing is viewed as borrowing, vandalism is viewed as expressive art. Hey, I was spray painting these buildings. It's not a big deal. If you don't like it, you can wash it off, but that still costs money, and spray paint is a little bit harder to clean up. But you're denying the injury, because you're neutralizing, you're justifying that it's not that big of a deal. Even denying the victim. Criminals neutralize wrongdoing by maintaining that the victim had it coming. Hey, the person who molested the person, yes, that's a sleazy, scummy, bad person who molested somebody. But to go ahead and say, hey, that person should have been brutally stabbed by maybe 2, 3, 4 inmates, they had it coming, that person's a victim too. They need to have their day in court and potentially face a substantial amount of time behind bars, but we can't be judge, jury, and executioner, right? So saying they had it coming is a bit contradictory. Other neutralization techniques, we have condemnation of the condemners and appeal to higher loyalties. When looking at condemnation of the condemners, shifting blame to others, criminals are going to repress their awareness that their acts are wrong. In fact, they might even view the world as corrupt or dog eat dog. Perfect example of this. Hey, the judge is condemning me and is about to slap down a sentence, but the judge probably is over here gambling, or the judge is probably over here doing shady stuff. Police, hey, they're arresting me and not condoning my behavior, but if I really peel back the onion and pull back the veil on those police officers' actions, they might be doing some of the same things. I knew law enforcement officers. I used to work in law enforcement. I knew plenty of law enforcement officers who did drugs, but it wasn't a big deal for them because they were the law, right? So understand that, yes, some will say there's a dog-eat-dog code. And then lastly, appealing to higher loyalties. Novice criminals argue that they are caught in the dilemma of being loyal to their peer group while attempting to abide by the rules of society. They take the rules of the group or the needs of the group take greater aim because the group demands are immediate. They have the group that's right there, even though they live in society. The group is more important because the group will always be there for them and the group will always take care of them. So next up, let's talk about social control theory. Social control theory maintains that all people have the potential to violate the law and that modern society presents many opportunities for illegal activity. I do love this theory. This is one of my other favorite theories, along with social disorganization theory and rational choice theory. Strain theory is growing on me because let me tell you something real quick. I wish I saw this last week of strain theory. I maybe would have thrown this as a bonus question. But I was going to pick up my son and his friend, right? His two friends from the church pool party. And again, this is in a suburb of Metro Atlanta. I'm driving in a more affluent suburb with a school that is rival to my son's school. And I see a sign saying new homes starting at the 900,000s. I just throw up my hands. Because when I'm talking to you all and lecturing to you all about strain, how individuals are likely to engage in crime due to the frustrations of not being able to obtain or attain a measure of financial success or financial means, they're frustrated, they're angry. Strain is society saying that due to the rising costs, due to exorbitant amount of costs when it comes to the cost of living, well, some people are going to turn to crime because they don't have the legitimate means to survive in this economy, in this society. And when I see $900,000 houses about to pop up, I say, hey, I know there's people out there that can afford it. I know there's plenty of people that can afford it. Plenty of people got a lot of money in the bank. Plenty of people got wealthy resources that they can tap into. But then I think about all the people who are homeless. And I think about the homeless man that I saw probably about 20 minutes from my house as it was starting to rain and he was sitting on a bench. Again, I don't know what choices that man made, And I'm not going to condemn someone who has the ability to purchase a $900,000 house. But I'm saying, how do we have people that are homeless, that still are unhoused, but we're popping up with 900,000, almost $1 million houses, and you can probably believe the house will be $1 million when it's all said and done because they'll uptake the price. So, with that being said, I love social control theory too because we all have opportunities for illegal activity. There's nothing really stopping me, even as a professor and former law enforcement official, from engaging in crime. But there is. And you know what that thing is? Social bonds. We will get to that in just a moment. So Travis Hershey, he provided 4 main elements of a social bond. And what he did was he looked at it from the perspective of delinquency. So he wanted to tie it back to children or juvenile delinquency. So what he came up with are these 4 elements: attachment, commitment, belief, and involvement. So let's look at the first 2, attachment and commitment. When testing the social control theory and those bonds, with attachment, if a child is sensitive to the interests or sensitive to or interest in others, interested or sensitive to parents, peers, schools, they're attached to their families, they have good friends, they love their school, love their school, they are less likely to engage in illegal activities. Think about how unattached kids are more likely to get involved in deviant peer groups and more likely to engage in illegal activities. Now, when we look at commitment, right? Time, energy, and effort are spent in conventional activities, getting an education. Kids who are committed to, let's say, sports, like my son plays football. A lot of those kids have been playing football for years. It's this time of the year. They're committed. It takes a level of commitment, even though it's the summer and he's out of school until August. It takes a level of commitment to set your alarm and get up. Now, dad has to wake him up, but still, he's committed. He could be like, Dad, I'm not getting up. I'm going back to sleep. And I'd be like, okay, you're just not taking your football seriously. You're training seriously and getting ready for the season seriously. The same goes with education. If they're very committed to their school and committed to their education, they're less likely to be involved in delinquent acts compared to those who may not have the same level of commitment. We also talked about belief. What do you believe in? Just like in rational choice theory back in chapter 4, what are your morals? What are your ethics? How are you governed in the professional sphere, ethics? How are you governed in the personal sphere with morals? What are your morals? What are your values? Do you even believe in the rule of law, right? Understand that having a positive belief, children who have positive beliefs and they already know what their morals are from the jump will be like, hey, I don't need to engage in criminal activity or engage in crime. I'm going to be able to desist from that because I don't want to go down a path that, I don't want to go down a path that is potentially dangerous for me in my future. And of course, being involved in religious activities makes a huge difference because for some, that belief in God, having a belief in a spiritual higher power is enough to keep people on the right track because they don't want to disappoint that spiritual, guide or that spiritual father. And then lastly, involvement. Similar to commitment, involvement involves participating in conventional activities, participating in sports, clubs, and school-based activities. When youth are involved in extracurricular activities or those supervised social activities, they're less likely to engage in delinquent acts, period. Right now it's the summer. The football team is loaded between ninth graders, JV, and varsity players. At least those people, even if they live in good neighborhoods, bad neighborhoods, if they get in trouble, don't get in trouble, right now, at least for several hours a day, they are away from those negative peers. They're involved in their sports. And being involved in their sports reduces the chances of engaging in delinquent acts or criminal acts. So if we had to critique social control theory, we can critique it a number of ways. First of all, we can say in terms of the influence of friendship, some delinquents are detached loners and their bonds to friends are broken. Okay, so they don't have the strong friendship that you might have as an adult. They are already detached loners or they don't have a bond with friends if that bond's broken. The failure to achieve commitment to career and academic advancement reduces criminal involvement. But what about kids who fail in school even though they try? It's very possible for some children to go to school, try as hard as they can, and still do very poorly in school. They need additional resources, they need help, they need services and assistance, but that failure to achieve can be demoralizing and deflating to them, and they may say, well, I might as well just engage in crime. And then deviant involvement. High levels of involvement can also mean high levels of criminal behavior. If you're outside a lot, if you're doing whatever you want to do, if you're unsupervised, if you don't have to check in, that can lead to deviant involvement because you're going to link up with peers and people who share the same values, ideals, and beliefs. Other critiques, again, the deviant parents and peers, drug abusing parents, violent parents, if they engage in those behaviors, the child is more likely to engage in those behaviors. The mistaken causal order, weakened bonds lead to delinquency, but if a chain of events may flow in the opposite direction. So, for example, youth who break the law find that their bonds with parents, schools, and society are already weakened. And so being a criminal is only going to make it even weaker, right? So it has this mistaken causal order, and increases in criminal behavior and problems may decrease parental control and support. In other words, parents aren't going to be as controlling and supportive because I'm like, if you want to get in trouble, you're on your own. I can't tell you how many times as a probation officer before I move on, I have parents say, Officer Fields, nah, he has court, he can go. And I'm like, ma'am, it doesn't work that way in Georgia. You have to be there. He's still considered an adult. Nah, he's got it. He's okay. And I'm like, you want your 14-year-old to show up to court by themselves? And they'd be like, yeah. So, of course, I tell the judge, and then we get them involved in foster care. It's a mess, though, right? It's a mess, but, it sometimes happens. Parents a lot of times don't want to support children when they get in trouble. It's controversial, but I can understand the frustration. So our last one is social reaction labeling theory. So we have social learning theory, social control theory, and social reaction labeling theory. This is a theoretical view that people become criminals when significant members of society label them as such, and they accept those labels as a personal identity. So a couple of key points is, first, the behaviors that are considered criminal are highly subjective. What we see as criminal, others may not see as criminal, but it's very highly subjective. Crime is defined by those in power. We'll get into that next chapter. Not only acts are labeled, but people are labeled as well. And both positive and negative labels involve subjective interpretation of behavior. Now, when thinking about these labels, what is important to know is that if you label something or label someone as something, they're going to join up with other people who fit that same label. Give you an example. If you're calling somebody a criminal, a delinquent, a deviant, whatever the case may be, they're going to join up with people who share some of the same labels, right? It's very simple. So joining deviant cliques is very much in play when it comes to the consequences of labeling someone as a delinquent, as a thug, as a hellion, whatever. They're going to say, okay, well, if I'm a thug or I'm a bad seed or whatever you call them, then I'll show you what a thug or a bad seed will do. The other part of this is the retrospective reading. And this is a reassessment of a person's past to fit a generalized label. So think about, if a person's labeled as an ex-con, the notion is that they're very dangerous, big, and scary guy because they're labeled an ex-con. They could be a sweet, sweet guy that did something bad, but it didn't mean that they were out here, they're hardcore, and if you look at them the wrong way, they're going to punch your lights out, right? So the retrospective reading sometimes is focusing on the person's past has to fit a generalized label. In other words, you have to write the narrative in a way you want it to be written to fit the story of this person. This person over here is dangerous, they're bad, and if you actually sat down and talked to that person, they're not. So differential enforcement, the law is differentially applied. It benefits those who hold economic and social power and penalizes the powerless. If you don't have much in the way of financial freedom, monetary opportunities, etc., then the feeling is that the law benefits only those who hold a certain power. We'll get to this next week or in the next chapter, when we look at social conflict, critical criminology, and restorative justice, and we talk about how, people like Karl Marx was trying to sound the alarm simply because he was trying to say only the people who are powerful and have money and have class are making the decisions to only benefit them and not all of the people. And that's what differential enforcement is alluding to. And then it's looking at research on social reaction or labeling theory. What are the targets of being labeled? Think about our political climate right now. Let me pause. We're still carrying out mass deportations, right? Whatever you feel, whether you agree or disagree, this is not the forum on this. However, imagine people of Hispanic descent, how they might feel and what they might be thinking if they encounter law enforcement. Think about it. Racial profiling is very real. Minorities, people of color, people who are black, brown, etc., have experienced racism and they've experienced racial profiling. In other words, because they fit the description, they fit the type, they were believed to be the problem. Yes, police have a measure of discretion to search people, and they have a measure of discretion to want to see what this person is all about. But still, there's a difference between discretion and harassment, right? You can still be very respectful to a person, even if they are here undocumented and illegally, and you can still be respectful of them instead of treating them like animals, right? So labeling is a very real powerful thing, and it happens more than we think. We label people a lot. And one of the biggest effects of labeling is that once you get that label, you can't shake that label. You're always known as the moron. You're always known as the idiot. You're always known as the failure. You're always known as the crazy one, right? Those are all negative labels that people have been have been subjected to. And once you have that moniker, it will sit in, and you may believe that, no, I am crazy. No, I am unlovable. No, I am a failure. No, I am dumb, whatever. And they believe it, and then it starts to really affect their psyche and their, positive energy and way of thinking. All right, so here we are. We've reached the end of chapter 7. Within this chapter, social process theories, we really wanted to look on how criminality is linked to those interactions with social processes, interaction with peers, parents, the community, etc. This theory focuses more on the socialization aspect of it, where social structure theory focuses primarily on the buildings. We had 3 core theories. We had social learning theory, like how people learn. We had social control theory. What are your bonds that will keep you from engaging in crime? Mine personally are my belief in God, my family, and my career, because you can't have Professor Fields be showing up on the news and they go, that guy's a professor, and he used to be in law enforcement. Can't do it. And then the last one, social reaction labeling theory. When criminals are labeled as such, they sometimes work to live up to the name. So I definitely want to thank you for tuning in to Chapter 7, the beginning of this new week and module. Stay tuned for our Chapter 8, which focuses on social conflict, critical criminology, and restorative justice. But take care, and I will see you in the next video.